Hello Astro subscribers. So in the last video on the ninth layer, which is the layer of perception that is self-referential, that includes the entire layer system within it, I showed you guys a diagram of a tree. Some of you may have rightly realized its similarities to the Kabbalistic tree of life, but as well as the tree of life found in other traditions over the world. And that would be a fair assessment, except for that there's a few key differences, and I honestly think my tree of life works better than those other ones, and I guess I'm going to try to explain the system of it and how everything relates to itself to you, and you can judge for yourself if you find it more useful, if you want to use it, if you want to use the other people's. If you want to use both of them for different things, experiment with it and be my guest. But in the same way that the aspects and the house system and sign system and whatnot are ways in which the archetypes interact with each other, they are valid ways that the archetypes interact with each other. This tree system is also another set of aspects. You can think of it like that. It is a way in which the archetypes interact with each other, which is based not so much on dissonance or resonance in the way that the signs and aspects are, but instead is based in the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So when you're looking at these, well, this is more complicated than I really wanted to get into, but the idea of thesis and antithesis is the idea that instead of putting two things together and getting something that's a combination of them, when you put a thing and its opposite together, instead of getting something that cancels out or that doesn't exist, you instead you elevate the thing, the contradiction, you elevate the contradiction to a higher state of being that encompasses everything that the contradiction, the individual parts of the contradiction had, and also can do other things as well that are a product of that combination. So it's the idea that the sum is more than the whole of its parts. And in math, this is not usually true. However, in symbolism and in literary stuff, this is often the case, because the things in literary work and symbolic work they're not an identity. They are a giant combination of moving parts. And because of that, when you combine them together, you get emergent properties that are more than the sum of the two things, or more than the two things you put together combined. So I'm going to walk you through this tree structure, and I'm going to try to explain it to you, and hopefully you find it enlightening and useful. So here we go. All right, so you can start from virtually any point on this structure here. But the first place I want to start with is just the overall structure of it. You've got 5 tiers. You've got a top and a bottom. Well, technically 6 tiers if you count the 12 there at the bottom. And I haven't been through layers 10 through 13 at this point. I will be going through those shortly. But basically the 13th layer that you can see there, it's representative of like basically the highest good and like massive creative achievement, and it's like this sort of, think of it as like radiating this sort of golden light, and I'll get more into that later. And then the 12th layer, you think about it as the opposite of that. It's like virtually equally powerful, but sort of an inverted quality, a dark quality, sort of radiating like a purple or a black light. So here you have the sun and the moon, and this synthesis exists at like and when I say synthesis, I basically mean just you're combining two opposite things in order to gain a higher perspective on them. So the sun, I've already talked about what the sun means: creativity, personal power. It's sort of a masculine element. And when I say masculine, I mean symbolically masculine, archetypally masculine, not like, physically or anatomically masculine. And then here you have the Moon, which is the feminine. It's emotional, it's receptive, it's reactive. So in the combination of these two things, you get something that is able to move down to the next level. This is Mars, 7th layer again, related to the hour system. I've made a video on that. It's associated with the masculine ego and the action on desire. And here is the feminine, the Venus, 5th layer, which, if you remember from the 5th layer video, is not only ruled by Venus, it's related to the signs, and it's related to human desire in general. So here you have receptivity and action, or sensitivity and reaction to that sensitivity or action. Here you have desire and action on desire. So you're beginning to see a pattern here. Through that synthesis, you get, I'm going to leave the 11 alone for now. Through this synthesis, you get 8th layer, which is the system, the man, the machine, the thing that is basically indicative of all the order in society. It's related to prisons, rehabs, corporate environments, that kind of thing. Just structure in general. So you've got the 8th layer here, which is the state, and then you've got the 13th layer. Now this is also the 13th layer because it's the sun, but this 13th layer is Jupiter. So both Jupiter and the sun relate to the 13th layer. And Jupiter is philosophy and higher understanding and religion and that kind of thing, belief systems. So here you have the state, and here you have basically the belief systems that update and inform the state. Going down another level, you have, this is like the sort of creative dialectic, the creative opposition. You have Neptune, which is all the confusion and undifferentiated potential that is sort of contains all ideas in the contradiction, but also is not organized and is kind of destructive in that way. It is a flood, it is a swamp. And here you have the 9th layer, which is the inverse of that. It's metal, it's machines, it's creativity, it's engineering, but it's the ability to take the raw material that is this Neptunian natural sort of environment and turn it into a streamlined mechanical process that is, it has a function. And so this is basically the environment and the engineer, and this represents the creative dialectic. And here you have the best way to think about the 4th layer versus the 10th layer. The 10th layer is best described as Zen. It's best described as sort of a black hole that you fall into. It's related to K2, the south node of the moon, which would make sense why it's opposing the 4th layer, which is associated with Rahu, which is associated with materialistic consumption and this sort of never-ending animal desire to consume that is sort of also disorganized. And the reason these two are in opposition is they represent the limits of the desire of the animal, of the body, of the ego. So here you have the limit of consuming forever, and here you have the limit of sleeping forever or being completely in the void, in a vacuum. Now, these are the sort of oppositions here that exist in this view of the archetypes. Now, moving from top to bottom here on the middle pillar, you have the 12th layer, which is represented by Pluto here. And again, it shares that with the moon, that sort of dark, radiating, sort of inverted solar energy. And here you have the 11th layer, which is ruled by Mercury, which is basically spontaneous creativity. And this is basically the creative individual. You can think of it as the hero. And that hero could be male, female, whatever. The human, it's the sort of creative, magical power in the human soul. It's different than this creativity, because this creativity, it takes the raw natural chaos and transforms it into sort of a streamlined mechanical state. This takes the sort of chaos of the human mind and turns it into a more organized and capable sort of creative endeavor. And of course, all of this is contained within the opposition of basically this extreme positivity and this extreme negativity. And that's basically how this tree or these archetypes are arranged. And I'm going to basically just give a brief summary of this at the moment and then let you guys run off and do whatever you're doing. So that was basically my analysis of the tree system. And again, you can think of the tree system as a way to understand how the archetypes interact with each other, in the same way that the aspects are a representation of the way that the archetypes interact with each other. One thing that's very interesting, that's sort of a practical understanding of this tree system, is you can look at most like social or political movements that are happening in the world right now, and you can trace them back to people only having or only identifying with one half of the archetypes on that tree. So they're identifying with one pillar over the other pillar. And as a result, they have sort of an imbalanced worldview, an imbalanced perception of the sort of way that the archetypes interact with the world. So the best example, honestly, is the environmental movement. So no matter what side of that movement you fall on, I would like you to sort of detach from being polarized about that and focus on the archetypes themselves. So you have nature on one side, and the environmentalists say nature needs to be protected, and then you've basically got the sort of streamlined mechanical industry. And what is the main opposition to the environmental movement? It's people saying, well, you know, we need to make machines because nature is not only beautiful, it's also very dangerous, and it's chaotic, and it's gonna, you know, consume our society if we let it get out of control and whatnot. And then the environmentalists say, well, there's too much industry. So it's basically the nature of the conflict is nature versus sort of human mechanical engineering and social progress. So that's basically just a direct opposition between the 6th layer and the 9th layer. And people fall on one of those two sides, but they don't understand that those two sides exist simultaneously. So it's not nature and versus machinery. It's machinery and nature in sort of sync and harmony. Another example is, you know, people often, like in the debates of like religious and atheist people, like no matter where you fall in that sort of spectrum, the atheist people basically assume that religion is a function of the state. So they assume that the 13th layer is just part of the 8th layer. It's like equally material, equally structured. They only see the dogma. And because of that, they can't see the fact that there's positive and negative aspects of the religious system, and also of the state system. So people who are sort of anti-establishment, they will often see only the negative side of the state system, whereas and they often sort of imply the positive side of it. And yeah, so that's what happens when you hear people talking about like, oh, like Rage Against the Machine, like, you know, the man, you know, stand up to the man, all this stuff, stand up to authority, all this stuff. They're only seeing one half of the archetypal structure, and these archetypal structures, in order to be understood, you have to look at them in terms of a pair of conflicting points, and then don't identify with the conflict, identify with understanding from a detached position that both of these things matter, both of these things are necessary. The final, like, easiest way to understand or to see this stuff play out in real life is like the issue of like gender, how like there's the feminists over here on the 5th layer side, and then there's the MGTOW guys and the red pill guys. They even call it the red pill, just like Mars, right? On the other side, and there's this made up sort of fantasy conflict between the feminist people who are always like wearing their like pink hats and their pink ribbons, and then you've got the manosphere guys who are sort of identifying with this like 7th layer, like Mars, like go-getter, and they're also like really into like pickup culture, like, right, like gratify all your desires immediately, like, you know, do all this stuff. So you've got these oppositions between these two archetypes again, And both of these archetypes need to get along, right? Like in the perfect world, you don't have only men or only women. You have men and women getting along in harmony. In the perfect state, you don't have only dogma or only sort of unguided, unstructured philosophy. You have both of these things existing, order and philosophy existing in the same space harmoniously. In the perfect natural sort of society embedded in nature, you don't have only industry or only nature. You have a coexistence between nature and society and industry. And the same could be said for the other oppositions as well. So by understanding this set of aspects and this sort of tree, this ladder structure, you can really start to understand why most of these social conflicts can be just honestly better understood by just looking at both sides of the issue at the same time. Because there is a structure to this stuff, but when people don't know the structure, they sort of naturally cling to one side of that tree. And they assume the other tree is their enemy, but it's not. So anyway, that was my explanation of that layer system, that tree layer, and that tree set of aspects. I hope you found it enlightening and useful, and please leave your comments below. I want to know if this is helpful to people. Do you prefer the Kabbalistic tree of life? Do you prefer mine? Do you prefer none? Do you think I'm crazy? Just let me know in the comments, and till then, have a nice day.